Today, we have with us a very special and esteemed guest. Please join me in welcoming Professor Scott Magelssen, Head of Theater History at the School of Drama, University of Washington, today. Hey, Mr. Magelssen, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, thanks. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, likewise.
Yep, so you want to just get started?
That sounds great.
Alright, let's delve straight into discussing theater in ancient Rome. First of all, how did Roman theater serve as a tool for reflecting or shaping societal norms and political agendas during its time?
Well, that's a great question, and it's a complicated answer with several parts, as you can imagine. Um, you know, uh, Tragedy was added to the Roman festivals around the middle of the third century BCE, and tragedy was added first, comedy was added a little bit later, and these dramas took place within the context of the festivals. And so, in addition to audiences being able to go see plays, they could also go see gladiator fights and wild animal fights and boxing matches and rope dancing and sea battles. And so the audiences during the festivals had a lot of different choices for what they would go to see for entertainment. And they could even leave the plays in the middle of the plays to go see something that they thought might be better or more entertaining. And so um, these plays were in the marketplace of different kinds of entertainment. And so in that manner, they had to avoid being too preachy or too political. They had to avoid being seen as overly educational or overly didactic, uh, and to be more entertaining, so they could really attract these
I
audiences.
see.
In that,
So,
oh yeah, go ahead.
sorry. So what you're saying is at this time frame, they had a lot of other things going on, like, gladiator fights. They had a lot of other choices they could use for entertainment. So that's why when these, playwrights, they had to, remain non-political to attract more audiences?
That's right. For that reason, yes, they had to compete for audience members. They might leave if they felt they were being kind of scolded or judged for their behavior. But also it was and we're talking about a period of over 500 years of theater.
Yeah.
But altogether, it was a fairly conservative time in that playwrights could get in trouble if they were seen as critiquing the government or the empire, the republic, and then the empire uh, too specifically. And so, if there was drama that influenced or shaped societal norms, they had a small window within which to do that.
Mm,
And
yeah.
so they tended to critique things like bad behavior, poor judgment, acting indecorously or acting too strictly, poking fun at these behaviors, critiquing them, and modeling good behaviors, as opposed to actually satirizing a current political leader, for instance.
Yeah, this reminds me of in episode one of this podcast about Greece, there was a playwright named Euripides,
Hmm.
and he made these plays which would directly poke fun and patronize all the choices and communities that Greece made. And
Yeah,
so it just reminds me of how during this time frame in ancient drama, it was always just risky to create plays because whenever comedies, for example, they just it's a really risky shot at trying to inspire humor in these audiences when at any time if you make one wrong joke you could just be immediately executed.
absolutely. Euripides was writing in Athens in the golden age of drama. Same can be said about Aristophanes, the comic playwright.
Yeah.
And each of these playwrights did not hold back in some ways of making known how they thought society could be improved. Really, with the end of the Peloponnesian War and the fall of Athens as an influential center of culture, drama really did start to become more conservative, um, with some exceptions. But yeah, in,
Yes,
in
yeah.
Rome, I think they had a much less latitude to be able to make those critiques.
Indeed. I also think it's really interesting how with drama today and how inclusive and how really just fun it is. Comparing current day drama and Roman theater and how like conservative it was, it really shows like how much of a change drama has been through, which is like why I'm doing this podcast in the first place.
Yeah, it's a great it's a great enterprise to really look at the scope of the different kinds of theater and drama that have existed since the beginning, and how society, depending on the political context, the historical situation, um, allowed for those stories to be told. Yeah, certainly.
Exactly. All right. I have some more questions. You
Okay.
wanna move on?
Yeah.
So, Roman theaters welcomed audiences from all classes. How do you think this inclusivity influenced the content and messages of Roman plays?
Another great question. I think that's right. During the festivals, everything was suspended, and everybody got to go to the entertainments, and that included the what we'd call now the upper class, the aristocracy, the what we'd kind of consider the middle or working
Oh,
class,
okay. Yes, yes, yes.
and and even the enslaved people. And so the playwrights, the tragic and comic poets, were aiming their plays at a broad swath of audience members. Now, what we imagine is that typically the people who would be attending, and by the way, comedies were much more popular than tragedies. I would go so far, and a lot of scholars agree, that to say that the tragedies of Seneca may have rarely been performed in the theaters, if ever. They may have been written exclusively for being read as kind of closet dramas. So the comic playwrights were really aiming to, as I said, compete with the other entertainments, and so you have theorists and critics like the Roman writer Horace, who was really cautioning playwrights to avoid watering down or dumbing down their comedies to appeal to the
Lower
crude
classes.
tastes of the
Yes.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. But to add to that, some of these playwrights were enslaved people or former enslaved people themselves. Terence, the playwright, was a former enslaved person from Carthage, and so we imagine that he was crafting his enslaved characters to be kind of the heroes of his dramas. They were always a little bit more cunning, a little bit more smart than their masters or the young lovers that they were helping out.
Yeah. Especially like later on as well. Not current day, but about like in the Renaissance ages.
Hmm.
I remember that a lot of playwrights would take inspiration from these Roman playwrights and how they would like tackle these themes where they would try to expand their plays to such a wide audience, right?
Hmm.
And it's really hard doing that because the upper class aristocracy, they have so much different interests than like the lower class and middle class.
Yeah,
It's such a wide disconnect that's still being like
yeah, yeah,
explored.
certainly.
So yeah.
Yeah.
And then let's move on to the most famous playwrights of the time,
Okay.
Plautus and Seneca.
Hmm.
So, as we discussed, Plautus was a comedic playwright,
Hmm.
and comedies were much more popular. So, Plautus' works are known for their farcical humor and social critique. Do you think his comedic approach had a lasting influence on modern comedy, and if so, how?
I think yes, certainly. We see the kind of comic conventions of Plautus's works in today's comedies, like rom-coms, like sitcoms. I see it in episodes of The Simpsons. I see it in the sitcoms I grew up with, like Three's Company. Um, you have typical stock characters. That is, they behave according to the kind of person they are, as opposed to behaving according to the psychological motivations and their upbringing. Um, the comedies usually start with, the world is in trouble, the domestic world is in trouble because somebody has acted inappropriately or in a too strict of a manner, or they haven't allowed the young people to be boyfriend and girlfriend, and then the conflict is resolved when the family or the folks in the play figure things out, and there's a happy ending. So I think we see this very specific structure and kinds of characters in a lot of the comedies we see today. I think that since the 19th century, when we have the development of psychology as a science, we start getting more realistic approaches to characters. That changes a little bit, but I think you still find some of these very traditional kinds of Plautus style comedies. And is that particularly Plautine? Is that particularly based on Plautus's writing? I think Plautus himself was borrowing from the plays of Menander, the Greek new comic
Oh, yeah.
playwright, and so it could be that we can attribute these qualities to Plautus, but it could just be that he was really good at adapting Menander's work to a contemporary Roman context. The problem is we have very few Menander plays. We only have one extant complete Menander play to judge from. So we're not sure how much of this is Plautus, how much of this is the people
Yeah,
he was borrowing from.
that is actually a really good point because like another thing I've researched is that a lot of playwrights they will take ideas or inspirations from older playwrights and adapt them to make it like fit the current time frame, right?
Yes, yes.
So it's really interesting to see how they take old ideas, take an old play based which was once again targeted to an old audience, and then repurpose that play to target a new audience. And it's just ideas like these that are like always really cool.
Yeah, I agree, for
And
sure.
speaking of this actually segues really nicely into our next question, which was, as you know, Seneca. He was more focused on like dark philosophical tragedies, and something interesting is that they seem to resonate with later works in those of Shakespeare. There are many Shakespearean plays that have a lot of Seneca's tragedial elements in it.
Yes.
Do you think Seneca's Stoic philosophy enhances or detracts from this emotional depth of his plays?
I think that with regard to the Stoic philosophy, I think that a lot of historians and critics agree that that's probably the best of what Seneca has to offer. You know, the Stoic reflections on human nature, on humans' relationships with the gods and with the cosmos, how to behave, how to comport oneself as one moves through life. I think these are the nuggets of wisdom that Seneca gives us. I think once you take that element out, what you have is a bunch of gory, sensational drama, and bloody, gory scenes that really go further than the Greek tragedies in terms of the violence. And so, but I think what makes Seneca and his work so interesting and so influential is the story over and over again about a protagonist like Theseus in Phaedra or Oedipus in Oedipus
Oedipus
Rex.
Rex, yep.
Yes, kind of straying from that middle path that the Stoics advocated. You know, acting too quickly, acting too irrationally, being too arrogant, presuming that they knew more than they did, and then really paying for it very tragically. And so I think that's where we see this kind of narrative showing up in works like Macbeth, in works like Hamlet, and in some of Shakespeare's contemporaries.
Okay, yeah, that's I really agree with the idea, especially with the how if you take Seneca's Stoic philosophy away, all it becomes is just like fight scenes, like gory blood scenes.
Yeah.
Because it really is like after you look at it through that lens, Seneca really just crafted a bunch of like really horrific fight scenes, and then added his touch of like philosophy to make it a coherent play.
Yeah.
And there's just like these types of like ideas and works that make it like really interesting to see how these like really drastically different playwrights really work together, or not together, but like work with their own mindsets and create these new types of ideas.
Yeah, and I should add though that even some of the most bloody and gory moments of Seneca's plays are also a reflection of his Stoic philosophy. I mean, I can give an example. In Oedipus, when the prophet Tiresias comes in to help Oedipus solve the mystery about why Thebes is in trouble, um, uh, 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 Tiresias conducts a ritual in which he ritually sacrifices a bull and a heifer, and then they take these animals apart and examine their entrails. And Tiresias' daughter Manto narrates what is happening because Tiresias is blind. And so they talk about the organs being gory and bloody and oozing full of black gall, and there's like different colors of flame that's like shooting out of these things, and the entrails are like screaming out in pain, and there's a a fetus coming out of the womb of the heifer, even though the heifer is a virgin heifer. And one can say this is just like absolutely ridiculous, and also proof that this play could have never been staged but was only intended to be read. But really, if you look at the Roman philosophy of the time, you can see that entrails and internal organs like the liver were considered texts that you could read through divination to see how the universe was doing. If the liver was somehow off,
Right. Yes.
it would indicate that the heavens, the cosmos, and the realm of the monarchy were also messed up. And so, putting in that some really messed up organs coming out of this sacrificed bull and heifer was a very clear sign philosophically to the audience that somebody really messed up badly,
and something's gonna happen.
and
So,
something's going to happen, and we're not going to get out of this
yeah.
in one piece, right?
I like these and I like these like types of like plays specifically where they'll have these elements where you won't recognize why they're there until like your third or fourth like reread or rewatch.
Yeah,
'Cause
certainly.
it's really cool how like even back then these playwrights were still adding these types of elements. It's just like such a fun detail to add.
Yeah.
You know, like after you watch the full thing through and realize the plot twist at the end, and then you go back and rewatch it, you can see the plot twist being built up from the very beginning, and it's
Yeah.
so nice whenever that build up happens.
Yeah, yeah. That's why I love my job so much. I get to do that all the time.
Yep. And then I just have two more questions left since
Okay.
we've talked about it a lot.
Yeah.
I would like to ask, what would be your perspective on the argument that Shakespeare drew heavily from Shakespeare's works? Like, we know that Hamlet is said to be heavily influenced by Seneca's revenge model. What do you have to say on that?
I think so. We see it, as I said, we see the revenge model in Hamlet. We see the elements of Seneca in other plays like Macbeth and Titus Andronicus, and we see these things in the Shakespeare's contemporaries like Christopher Marlowe. We see it in the later revenge tragedies and Jacobean drama by playwrights like John Webster, in The Duchess of Malfi, and Thomas Kidd in the Spanish tragedy. Now, did these playwrights have the works of Seneca in front of them as they were writing these plays? I think that the idea of the revenge tragedy in the Senecan form had been being practiced for a while by like university students who were reading Seneca in their studies of rhetoric, and they would do plays for each other, and then those plays gradually in the Elizabethan era became professionalized, especially with once Queen Elizabeth the First got rid of the biblical dramas, and the morality plays. We started having the emergence of professional theater, and these sort of Senecan style tragedies were already, in the works. Did Shakespeare even go to school? Did he go to university? Was he exposed to Senecan drama? It's hard to say. We have very little to go on, but I think it is safe to say that Seneca was, in the water at the time, and the sort of conventions, both philosophically and in terms of his, the kinds of things he focused on, were in circulation at the time.
Yeah. That does make a lot of sense as well. Saying how like, in Shakespeare's time frame, right? If you compare Shakespeare's time frame to Seneca's time frame, it's like almost like a 500, 600 year difference. Yeah. And it's like, it would be really hard for Seneca's like works to be like right in front of him. Mm-hmm. So, and that's also what I was thinking when I was like reading this. It's like, the ideas are there, but it just feels so unbelievable that like he would be like a direct copy, right? So in my opinion, I think that it's more like the ideas of Seneca persevered, and maybe Shakespeare picked up on that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I tell my own students it's kind of like you watch a contemporary Batman movie and you ask, did the people who made this Batman movie, did they look at the old Batman comics from the 1930s, the detective comics, or were they drawing upon the tradition of Batman movies and TV shows and comics that has been in existence for decades and decades? I think
Exactly.
that's
Yeah.
a good analogy in this case.
Yep. Okay. And then for my final question, it's were there any instances where Roman plays directly challenged or subtly like critiqued the ruling elite? We know that it was like really illegal at the time,
Yeah.
and it's like how were these received by audiences and authorities?
Yeah, it's such an interesting question, and one of the challenges is we have so few plays that are extant that have existed. We've got a handful of works by Seneca, a handful of works by Plautus, a few works by playwrights like Terence, and very rarely do we find direct critiques of the government of the emperor in the case of the empire, or of the leaders of the Roman Republic. I will say that when they wanted to make their biggest critiques, they would often set their plays in Greece.
Oh, okay.
All of Seneca's plays are based on Greek subject matter, and so if he does, critique the choices of a king, uh, they will. No one would be able to say, Seneca, I think that you are using this character as a direct critique of a current leader. He could always say, no, I'm just retelling a Greek story, right? And so he had
Yeah.
that safety net. There
So
is a
like
play,
he gave himself like a buffer to like
a
protect
buffer.
himself from this. Okay,
Yes,
that's
yes.
pretty cool.
Yeah, I think it's really a good strategy. Same with the Roman playwrights. The Greek models were more popular than the plays based on Roman subject matter. Now, there was a Roman tragedy that we have called Octavia, which has been attributed to Seneca, but it's doubtful that he wrote it. It actually is a play based on contemporary events. It is set in the time of Emperor Nero, and Seneca is actually a character, a tutor to Nero. And it's about how Nero decides he's not happy with his current wife. He wants to marry this other wife named Poppaea, and he gets rid of his wife Octavia by exiling her to death.
Yeah.
And it's very unlikely that this play was staged in its own time, and it may be that it circulated and was available for people to read. Um, but the degree to which it may have influenced the political leaders of the time, Nero or his successors, I think it's really hard to make those specific connections. I think the more interesting question is, in what ways were the Roman playwrights able to make these critiques, but how were they carefully veiled by these conventions, like setting them in another place so that they could hint at or gesture toward and avoid getting in trouble for
Right. Right.
being
Right.
more explicit.
It's very interesting as well, right? How like just I just wanted to draw back Euripides again, the parallel in Greece. It's like
Mhm.
it is these strategies of how like with how conservative drama was at the time, how clever these playwrights were that had these little like hints and signs to the audiences, like specifically the lower and middle class who would suffer the most under these like
Yeah.
under like corrupt leaderships. Like the signs are there, you can take them, but they also cannot be read by other powers, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah.
Right? So like for example, if King Nero had read that read or seen a play by Seneca that like directly criticized the government, like he could go up there and say these things, right? And then Seneca would have plausible deniability, but he could secretly be confirming to other audiences like middle class and lower class, like yes, this is directly a critique I have with this total government.
Yeah. And it's a technique, that kind of veiling a criticism, that we see throughout theater history. One can call it double coding, allowing some audiences to read or interpret the play in one way, and other audiences who are in the know to get the hidden
Yeah, the hidden
secret
message. Yep.
message. Yeah.
In fact, I'd say it's even present today
Hmm.
in this day and age. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
definitely there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
All right, that concludes my questions. Thank you so much for joining my podcast today. And yeah, I hope you had a really good time.
It's been an absolute pleasure. It's been great fun. Thank you again for inviting me.